Hey Chris, what's going on?
Freddie Kim, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Man, I am so excited to have you here. Hello and welcome to season 2 of the Build Your A Team podcast. This season we'll be sharpening our focus in our discussions and focusing more on how veteran entrepreneurs have been successful building their teams. We'll be uploading these videos on YouTube so everyone can see your beautiful face, Chris.
I appreciate it. Listen, I was trying to find my Mr. T starter kit with the gold chain, knowing that I was coming on the A-team building blocks on this. Unfortunately, I couldn't find it, but pleasure to be here. Super glad and happy to see you again, man.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Purpose of the podcast is to share how veteran entrepreneurs and business leaders build exceptional teams, uncovering whether success comes from strategic analysis, intuition, or just pure luck, right?
Sure.
A little bit about Chris Lefebvre.
Yeah.
He's a distinguished Marine Corps veteran and accomplished business leader with over 2 decades of experience in both public and private sectors. While in the Marine Corps, he served as a logistics officer for 7 years and deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq. He's also an MBA grad from the University of Maryland. Chris is the president and CEO of ISI Professional Services, founded in 2009, and it's established as the SDVOSB, and your team of over 50 professionals support a variety of federal agencies. Um, One thing I noticed, Chris, that I wanted to ask you about is this focus on golden rule at ISI
Sure.
that really shapes your culture. So, what is that?
Sure. Well, one go back, right, which is so ISI was founded in 91. Um, I joined in 2009 as a project manager. But yeah, I mean, we're closing in our 35th year of operation. Obviously, I've been there for about half of that time. But just one go back there. Yeah, for us in the golden rule, uh, and it's pretty simplistic, and that's kind of the point, right? And it hasn't always been within our sights and sort of in the evolution of what we've done the past couple of years of really defining who we are, how we deliver, um, looking of whether or not there's a need to revise our vision, mission, value statements, and the like. One of the things that came about is we were just so operationally focused, which we will always be.
Yeah.
But we were in major growth mode, then in execution mode, and candidly, if I'm being honest with myself, I think for a period we kind of you can lose sight of what got you here. And at the end of the day, what got us here is our people. And so in last year, we had a major internal focus effort around the people. I mean, how we show up for them, understanding how they show up for our clients, and is there any misalignment with how we need them to show up for our clients and how we know we need to show up for our employees. And so out of that was sort of this repurposing of the ISI way and these 5 pillars. And at the top of the 5 pillars, and it really transcends through everything else, is this idea of care. And the most simplistic definition of how we look at care is the golden rule, right? Treat everyone as you would want to be treated. So employer to employee, supervisor to subordinate, contractor, and ISI to our clients. And when you break it down in that simplistic way, it's one, much easier to empathize with anyone's plight, current situation, what they're going through, and even some sympathy, right? But it allows us to see through a lot of the noise. Perfect timing for that in today's current market, right? And so we're able to kind of see through the noise, get down to basics and our foundation, and really just deliver on that simple promise,
I
right?
love
Treat
it.
people how you want to be treated.
It's simple. Now, what happens if people don't follow it? Like,
Yeah,
I mean, because people can forget
it's
that.
inevitable,
Yeah,
right?
people can forget. You're working.
It is. Now, listen, I think it's part of our job as leaders to ensure that people don't forget, right? And so that's communicate early, communicate often, that consistency. That's not just sort of um, the golden rule or the care or any of the pillars or our vision and mission. It's all of it, right? It takes repetition and consistency, but more than anything else, it's kind of like the reflection principle, right? You have to model it. if my senior leaders are not modeling that and living this every single day, it's not that it's going to be forgotten. It is not going to be proven as a real priority, as a real foundational element of our organization, and it will not reverberate throughout the entire organization. So it's on us to one, to say it, to communicate it, to be really consistent in that, but more than anything else, like we got to live it.
Okay, yeah, agreed. Agreed. It's a very simple, like keep it simple, stupid type thing. But I mean, it's
Doesn't mean it's easy.
exactly, and
Yeah,
it's not easy though. I'm curious. Can you just tell us background wise what does ISI Professional Services do,
sure.
and like how you said you joined in 2009.
Sure.
Why did you join it?
Yeah, well, a little brief overview for ISI. I'll take a step back, not knowing, who the audience here may be. But fundamentally, ISI is a government contractor. So like, so what? What does that mean, right? Well, government contractor supports the government basically, right, in the broadest terms. So, and again, I think given the current landscape of what's happening right now with the new administration and the transition, this is fundamentally important, right? So, government agencies are resource constrained. Period. The end. Always have been. Likely always will be. But this covers like budget, human capital, systems, product, subject matter expertise, all of it. And what government contractors do is they provide these products and or services, or both. And so for ISI, one, we're a service disabled veteran owned small business. And what we've done is really deliver excellence within our core competencies and service set for almost 35 years. And these services specifically cover program and project management, construction management, real estate advisory support, and then a whole host of other services depending on the particular customer, what a need may be given an existing relationship. And so we deliver all of these things through people. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, for us, that's what service industry is delivering people. That's why, yes, they're our most valued asset. They are sort of the front line, boots on the ground, engaging with all of these clients. And so we begin to really package and look at and build depth in each of these areas across customers. But each of them for us, 100% of the work that we do is in support of the federal government.
Okay, um, so you're like problem solvers, consummate problem solvers, right?
Sure, sure, we can be, right. I mean, there are solutioning aspects of some of the work. Some of the work is also just sort of staff augmentation,
Mm,
right? Resource constrained, so there is not enough people on the federal side within a particular customer to do what's necessary. Maybe there isn't budget for it, maybe there's time constraints, and so a lot of what we do is really embedding our talent within our clients to help achieve whatever their mission critical elements is, right? It could be holistic enterprise wide, it could be down to a particular project or deliverable. And so it's a really wide swath of opportunities. So for those that are watching, great opportunities.
yeah,
It's a little chaotic right now with what's going on, but listen, out of that and when the dust settles, there undoubtedly will be increased opportunities.
absolutely agree as well. Your journey is really actually very interesting. So can you just touch upon it? You joined like after the Marine Corps, you joined as like a project manager, right?
I
And
did.
then you climbed the ranks all the way to the owner. Like, tell us real quick, how did that happen?
Sure. Listen, I don't know whether it was a falling off the ladder or a leap, but there wasn't much climbing. But yeah, you're right. So in transitioning at the end of 2008 out of the Marine Corps, I quickly transitioned into ISI. First job as a project manager supporting one of our long-term clients. And you kind of fast forward pretty rapidly 2.5 years and I become owner, right? So the jump is project manager to owner. And candidly, looking back, I had no idea how deep the pool was that I was jumping into. I didn't know what I didn't know, but I just knew my mentality. I knew that I had an incredible foundation of an organization that had been doing this at that point for about 20 years, but it was atypical. Even the opportunity that was created and presented and seized, you don't know all of what it is really in the moment.
Of course.
But as I look back, I think in that on why it was atypical, um, man, I love being. I love leading Marines. I think some of the drivers that sort of um, certainly not forced, but incentivized me to leave was it wasn't a meritocracy, and that goes for any service, right? That's not just the Marine Corps. Um, but it didn't matter how good you were, what you delivered, right? I could look at that career path ahead of me and know what rank I would be when, how much money I was making. It really didn't boil down to what value I was able to create and deliver. And so it was a big thing for me, and I think when I look back of what I sought to do as a project manager, the one thing that I knew, at least in the earlier officer ranks in the Marine Corps, that I wouldn't be able to do was impact the organizationally, right? At that level, you're just way too tactical. And so I wanted to go somewhere where I could impact it organizationally. Now, I didn't think it would happen in the way that it did, but no doubt. Fast forward 2.5 years, and I am owning and driving strategy. I did just that, whether it was by accident, dumb luck, or by sheer willpower, right? It all sort of materialized in that way. I think what's really interesting that I talk about is when I took over, I kind of became a second lieutenant, right? So imagine you're going to your first platoon. You got all these hard chargers that have been there, done that multiple times. They have all the subject matter expertise, existing relationships. It's kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah.
I came in, I was now leading this organization and all the people, and I knew nothing. At least that's the way it felt. I knew nothing. And so it was a familiar place to find myself. And so although it was intimidating, and there were more questions than answers back then, I kind of been there before in the Marines, and so that helped it be a little less daunting and allowed me to really focus myself, my efforts, what needed to happen next to better understand it, align the team, and really take things to another
That's actually, did you have a platoon sergeant
level. With an ISI, you mean?
within ISI? Yeah,
Ah,
like somebody like that gruff senior NCO
to
supporting
a
you.
degree, like I maybe had a couple of them, right? And
Cool.
and unfortunately, then it was a little siloed and fragmented.
Yeah.
But I did. I mean, I had my former business partner that was a mentor then. He was alongside me and a sounding board. I had an executive team. But listen, I would say, man, if I had to go back and sort of reverse roles, it's a swift change within the organization, right? Right. For many, they had no idea that this was in the plans because it wasn't. And all of a sudden and very rapidly, I go from being a project manager to owning the company. My former boss and supervisor, right? He went from supervising me to being supervised by me. And so the change management aspect of that was really challenging back then. But like all of us leaders know, right? You've got to create champions in everybody. And not everybody's gonna want to meet that head on with open arms, and so it really gets down to the age old adage, right? Like it doesn't really matter where the bus is going. You got to make sure the right butts are in the right seats on the bus. And so out of the gate, that's all I knew was leadership and people and sort of the creation and sustainment of high performing teams. And so that became absolutely critical, internal, sort of that change management. But then external was how do I go and create business?
Mm,
I mean, how is the company doing? I,
mm.
I, I literally didn't even know. You find out real quick, and you figure out how to do it all over time. But it's a pretty painful, challenging process.
You know, so I'll give you a little bit of context and then I'll ask this
Yeah,
if you're comfortable. The people listening could be transitioning veterans, they could be veteran business owners, they could be people looking for jobs. And so and for that audience that's like, what should I do after the military? A lot of people, including myself, when I was a captain getting ready to exit the army, I was like, you know what? I want to get away from defense altogether. Screw that. We're gonna go corporate world all the way, right? Having no understanding what that means. Yeah. So like, how did you like? How like if you were telling somebody transitioning your story, like how did that opportunity come to play where you could be an
sure,
owner of a company?
sure. I think it's atypical, right? I mean, I'm not kidding anybody in that. Um, but I'm a big believer in that there is luck. I personally have always been an opportunist in that regard, in that I can see opportunities before they are opportunities. and there are slow incremental efforts that can be done to shape those opportunities. Um, but at the end of the day, when an opportunity presents itself, are you ready? Are you willing? And for me, that was it, right? I mean, I initially was brought into ISI, and there were conversations that this was part of a longer term succession plan, call it 10 to 15 years, right? You got to get in, like, hey, let's start to get you acclimated, oriented around what government contracting is. And so that was part of a long term plan. Now, in that 2 years, it was never really discussed again, right? Because at the end of the day, work's got to get done. So tactically, I mean, I was just executing for my client on the contract that I was on. Uh, but throughout that, what I sort of the shaping was I was always the one to ask the questions. If there was ever an opportunity to be a fly on the wall in the room, didn't matter at what level, it could be internal organizationally, external, trying to develop business with an existing client. I just wanted to be in the room to absorb everything
Cool.
because I knew nothing.
Cool.
And so luckily, sort of interpersonally, I was able to create these relationships, even with leadership within the organization at the time, that were open to that because they knew I could keep my mouth shut, that I would just be a sponge and absorb it all in. And so in that, you start to understand what are we doing really well? What are we not doing so well? Are there particular clients that don't feel as if they're cared for as much as they should or as much as others, right? And so I started getting all of these data points. I didn't know what to do with any of them. Um, but they were sort of packaged and categorized for my own knowledge. And um, sort of how things came to a head was back then, sort of our status as a service-able veteran in small business kind of came into jeopardy. And so there wasn't a plan that was unknown, right? Major shock and ripple effect internal to the organization. Many of our contracts were in jeopardy. And so I had started to shape this experience of sort of the senior leadership in the organization of positioning myself as someone that was hungry, that was open. Um, and it was really a question. Hey, there is this situation. What are your thoughts? You know, and me being the young, hard-headed Marine that's willing to ram his head into the wall every day, hand goes up, right? Who's the one to volunteer? And I wanted it. I didn't even know what the it was. But all that I knew then was I wanted to impact an organization organizationally. And this was the opportunity. And so to go back to my point, when an opportunity presents itself, are you willing and able to seize it? And in that moment, seized it as rapidly as I could. And we would figure it out, right? We would build that plane as we were flying it. For an analogy, and other sports analogies, I always take it back to is like, man, I want to be that quarterback and it's 4th and inches, like down by 5, and I want the ball. I don't want to hand it off. Give it to me. I'm going to get it in. And back then, even not knowing what I didn't know, I knew that I could rely on myself, trust in myself, that I would outwork, out hustle, outlearn anybody. And in time, I would build a killer team. And that's what happened. It took a little longer than I thought that it would, sort of to start to realize the success and those things. But listen, that's the secret sauce. I didn't know what I wanted to do coming out of the Marine Corps. I was like a college graduate that had a degree and had this thing with no idea what to do with it. I just happened to find myself in an organization. Oh, by the way, the connection to the organization outright was through a relationship. Sort of they went and did this outreach to say, hey, here's kind of um, this person that we want conceptually.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know anybody?
Mm.
And through the channels, it landed on me like, would you please just go interview with this company, right? So I think that the
As a PM,
relationship game
that
out
was
of
as
the
a
gate is
PM.
so important.
That was as a PM, just to interview, or yeah.
Oh no, it was just I think back then, memory's a little foggy now. A lot happens in between, right? But it was probably predominantly for, hey, we are starting to think about succession planning,
Oh, I got it.
right? And they had we were an SDVOSB. My predecessor was a Marine, and sort of they had an idea of what they thought that they wanted and needed.
Yeah.
They certainly were not in a position to. We did not have a plan as to how that was going to happen.
Fair.
All right, it was an idea, and so that it was just through the connection. And I think, listen, much of my success in partnering in business, for sure, It's a relationship game, like much else, right?
Yeah,
And so, luckily, again, opportunity presented. Was I willing and able to take the interview, even though I wasn't looking for this type of job?
sure.
But once you get in there and have the conversation, like, how does it feel? How does it actually make you feel? And it made me feel like there was an opportunity. Um, and I guess where I was lucky is I got it right.
Yeah, so you were lucky. I mean, when luck is when
Sure.
opportunity meets preparation, right?
No
You're
doubt.
prepared, opportunity, bam. But also, it sounds like you like one for me. You were just a good dude, first of all, right? You were a good
Debatable.
dude. People liked you. People thought you were reliable. You did what you said
Sure.
you were gonna do. And then it also sounds like you know the whole old adage of you have 2 years in one mouth. You did a lot of listening and learning. So kudos to you. That's an awesome story. Now I'd love to understand and hear about the first day you come in. You're now the owner. You have an old team, right? You have old relationships, and you have the existing, the incumbent team. How long did it take you to build that A team of yours, you feel like?
Um,
You said it was longer than you
10 years.
10
Truly.
years. 10
Truly.
years.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, I was where I was very fortunate to assume ownership control of an existing business with 2 decades of excellent experience and past performance, right? That gave me a massive jump start. Whereas, listen, as an entrepreneur, I've never been in a startup, right? To have an idea from inception to execution, so that wasn't my experience. But the challenge was then also, right, is you needed to not rock the boat to some degree. That becomes a part of the change management. There's a human capital, interpersonal dynamic to that. But the reality is, man, we were so um, cash flow strapped back
Mm,
then.
mm.
And listen, if you're sitting on a bunch of cash and cash flow is not an issue, you can make some pretty sweeping changes pretty rapidly. That was not us then. And so, I mean, out of the gate, I would say within the first 90 days from a headquarters um, sort of overhead G&A staffing component, we probably laid off a third of the company from the headquarter position in the first 90 days. There was a time early on that every employee in our headquarters was asked, not forced, but asked to take a salary cut, pay cut. And so the beauty, right, is one, not everybody that was on the bus stayed on the bus. Some should have been on the bus. Others, listen, it was just from a lifestyle decision standpoint and income, personal well-being, they couldn't afford to take pay
Fair.
cuts, right? But as a business, you've got to start to draw some lines that if we are to survive, because we were in survival mode, not thriving mode, you really had to make some hard choices. And so we did early. Um, and again, as this is going on, I'm also getting my MBA. I'm trying to understand the implications of things that I'm learning in real time. Again, building the plane as we're flying it. Listen, parts are falling off. You're trying to figure this whole thing out. Um, but listen, I'm not going to say that cash is king, but it either propels you in a way to make really smart strategic decisions to execute tactically, or if you don't have it, like you just got to figure it out.
You're
And
drowning.
so we had many years of just figuring it out while I was still trying to learn. And it wasn't, again, probably going into the pandemic is when we really started tracking.
Awesome.
I mean, we went from a major jump in a couple of weeks of going from like 24 employees to over 200, massive win on a contract. And so that sort of changed the entire organization going into 2020. And we did it smartly, right? We then made investments back into the organization from systems, human capital, building structure, creating a machine that could, one, withstand the pandemic and all the disruptions that it caused, as well as, I would say right now, anything thereafter. And I now have a team that I very much feel like, as a Marine, if we were to go into battle, any battle, we will have a plan. Murphy's Law is going to hit. Listen, we're in it right now. And the communication that is happening is we have been here before. We will ride this out. We are not in survival mode. We are purely in threat.
Awesome.
And it is just a component to how we are, how we show up every day. And it doesn't mean that there are not challenges, because there are. But it took, I would say candidly, um, to get it right, not just the individuals, but what took the most time was getting the organizational structure right.
Mm,
And then once you have the structure right, even if you think you've got the right people in it, that may change, right? I mean, building a high performing team, and listen, this is overarching for this whole conversation about building an A team. How do you do it? Conversation, just hard work. Like it is all the above, right? Yes, it's the data, it's a little bit of gut, but at the end of the day, it takes really hard work to take a great team to a high performing team. It takes even more work to sustain the high performing nature of that team. And so this example is it's structure, it's execution, it's mentorship, it's road mapping, it's all of that. And for me, us in this situation, it took about 10 years. But in
man,
the last 4 years, man, we have gotten it right in spades. Still some missteps. You kind of come back, you adjust, because any variable, anything impacts the dynamic of that team, and you got to be able to adjust, modify, and potentially refocus direction, and then you got to go.
that's awesome. I love it. I love that. That fires me up. I think you said something very critical, like to map out hard work, obviously, diligence. You have to have like table stakes, right?
Yeah,
You need to bust your ass. But you said something that I think rang true, which is figure out your organizational structure first, right? Figure out what you need to be thriving. So, can you walk us through just how did you maybe since the pandemic, like when did you realize like, oh man, I need X positions or I need to restructure this, and then find the right body to fill it?
sure. There's no one right answer to this question, right? I mean, so I can only speak through my experience, but in my experience, throughout that time in the evolution, there are phases or instances where you know the right thing. Like, we've got this gap. But
Mm,
again, can you fill it? Do you have the money to be able to do it as one? What are the potential secondary and tertiary effects or unintended consequences of bringing someone new in? Let's just say from a leadership position, right? And so I think it is constant analysis. Surely you can't have analysis paralysis and not make decisions, but like I think that there are times where you know what's needed, but you may not always be able to do what's needed, right? And so for so long in my personal experience was that you just had to pull up your bootstraps, get shit done. I
mm,
mean, I had a big sign that sat on my desk and that's all it said, get shit done, right? And that's what I lived by. And so if I didn't have a resource that could do X, Y, or Z, I did it,
mm,
or it would get tasked to somebody else. And so there was a period of time, man, it was hard.
mm,
And, I was lucky I didn't have kids then. And so I could really consume myself in learning, because all of it, every role that I would take on or somebody else as an ancillary sort of task, man, the learning curve was so steep, but was it beneficial?
sure.
Right? So all of us were on this really sort of hyperbolic hockey stick learning curve and figuring a whole lot of things out. And so, like a logistician, as I was in the Marine Corps, you're a jack of all trades,
Yeah.
and you really are that. So you figure it out. Um, I was lucky, and it wasn't my doing. Sort of this major shift in my thinking and my approach as a leader of an organization. I had an executive coach at the time that I'd had a 20-year relationship with. Then Army major, we shared a tent in Afghanistan, and we'd always kept in touch. And he had since, gotten out of the Army, I think, at 27 years as a colonel, went into private industry, had success, and decided that like, he really wanted to coach. It was a missing component for him. And so we were engaged in that capacity. Um, and for me, again, seeing the opportunity before it exists, it shaped and presented an opportunity. Hey, let's do this. This feels right. And so I had initially brought him on as a COO, and
Really?
Yeah, and he was a phenomenal guy behind the gun. Right? I mean, major strategic planner as a brigade commander in the Army, and so brought a whole bag of tricks and knowledge that Captain Lefebvre, leaving the Marine Corps and then even leading ISI, I just really haven't interfaced with it. And I may have read about it, while getting my MBA, but to have a practical application and use specifically around organizational structure, like I just didn't have. And so he was able to help me and help the organization restructure ourselves, put some method to the madness around roles, responsibilities. And so, that took a couple years.
Mm.
Um, but even that for us, we were still getting a lot wrong in terms of specific talent resources in certain positions. And I think part of the reason is I was still figuring out who we were and who we were meant to be. And we were getting really successful. Like I said, and we went from 24 employees to over 200. Revenue just boomed. And so the change management piece is just still, we were just still caught in the surf, as I would always say. I'd come up for air, another wave is coming crashing. And some of those waves were great positive waves, but it was a wave nevertheless, right?
Mm.
You couldn't catch your breath. You couldn't see beyond the wave to the next wave. And so that probably took another 3 years. There was some continual evolution, refinement, um, integrating then. So now I am, you know, 10 years in as sort of CEO, and we still didn't have a defined strategic planning process,
Mm.
business or budget planning process. Those things were not yet defined. So in this interim, those things started coming into the fold as well. We also then started bringing systems in. And candidly, it wasn't until last year that again we've had some change in leadership, and I now have a leader in my chief people officer that has fundamentally changed um, my perspective of leadership, what it means to be a CEO, creating the space for myself to be that CEO, to focus on the things that matter, right, on the business, not as much in the business, and really looking to elevate all of my leaders. Right. So if I need to not be focused on these things that I've always had to do because we were in survival mode, someone's got to step in and do those things. And that takes time. And so much effort was done last year in this respect. And I give so much of the credit um, to her. She makes me a better leader. She makes me a better person. And the most important aspect of all of that in the last year is now I can almost say that of everyone on my leadership team. I mean, we have real hard conversations about this and creating like a psychologically safe space that any of us can come in and be like, I don't know. How do we figure this out? We've got some diversity of thought and perspective and experience here. Like, let's brainstorm. And so everyone is now elevating each other. I mean, our vision for the organization is succeed together.
Mm.
It's purposeful. Our mission is to empower others to achieve excellence. And so, in those two things, this high performing team nature, this collaborative sort of let's all butt our heads together to solve big problems, man, it's really come full circle. And so, what I'm seeing now that gets down to the question is there was this super long, steep learning curve, really slow curve of growth, success, organizational structure, roles and responsibilities. And we're hitting coming out of last year another major upswing. So, upswing of me to learn. I'm now learning more right now than probably back to when it was like the first 4 years. It's very similar, but in a different way. And so it's exciting to me again. And so there's a different feeling, culture, energy that is
What?
happening. And to your
Why?
point, because it's all the people that are in there.
Okay, there's so much. I have so much to like unpack and ask you from what you
Please.
just said. But what you said you're learning more now, is it more than ever? Is that because of the administration, or what is it? Why? Or is it because of your new chief people officer?
It's all the above. So
Mm.
I think that the transition where we transitioned of sort of my former COO and president that came in and man provided what we needed at the time. And
Mm.
it was hyper focused on structure. Um, and then the transition then is the operationalizing of that structure that
What
it
year
is
was that? Like the operational. when that?
That was the end of 23 going into 24.
Oh, okay.
And the key driver of that, which effectuated and was our primary focus in 24, was the people, right? And that's what, again, like we were experiencing success. We had growth. We were every year by year, like we were being forced to evolve pretty rapidly. And so looking back, and we've communicated internal to the organization, like, man, all this success, but maybe we were getting it kind of wrong. We lost sight of what matters most, which is the people. How are they felt? What are the benefits? How do we communicate and engage with employees? And so major focus, looking for a lot of feedback, right? And so that was it, is we would ask, our organization would respond, we would take action, and then we kind of close that feedback loop. Here's what we
Iterate.
asked, here's what you told us, here's what we did. Now, how does it land, right? And we're still refining that. And that is now something that will never change. It is just a part of who we are as an organization. And so, listen, yes, there were some senior leaders that came in that made big impacts. Um, and the biggest impact was the leveling up of all of our leadership. So, right, so rising tides raise all ships. And so that is really what's happening from a leadership standpoint within the organization, is everyone is becoming elevated. And in doing that, it allows everyone above them to create more space, to do bigger, more strategic, longer lead time elements. And that's allowing us to really operate at a high level and achieve things that maybe before we didn't even think were possible. And that doesn't always mean growth, revenue. It's not tied to that. Like, we're building a machine
Hmm.
that will allow us to scale up, scale down very rapidly, and never have degradation in delivery to our people and to our
Because
clients.
of the people, because of the
No doubt,
and team.
unquestionably.
And your looks like your change of your interpretation of leadership as well, because it's now so hyper focused on like the people and what they're looking for. I
It is.
love it. You're kind of applying like the principles of design thinking to it, right? Just you're iterating and
Sure.
constantly. Yeah.
And to that point, it's got to be agile,
Hmm.
right? Because I mean, you're going to have at any given moment, something's going to come in that sort of rocks the boat, whether it be a budget. I mean, what's happening right now, outright contracts, programs, entire swaths of customers as a GovCon that are gone.
Yeah.
And right. And so you've got to have a model even that can postulate and think through the different scenarios, right? I mean, it's just like operational planning and economics. Like, what are the different COAs? And what are our fallback positions to each of those? And you kind of go down a path and you wait for life to happen. And it's always going to happen.
So I mean, looking back, Chris, like it's interesting that all of this is really just blossoming, right, for you past
Yeah.
2 years. If you look back, could you have done this faster, or if you knew if you had the right people in other locations, or do you think it was just meant to be to like go through all of that grit to learn all your lessons to take you to where you are now?
Sure. I mean, I think that any of us can armchair quarterback or look in that rear view and say, if this was done differently, then this would have happened.
Mm.
Early on. And again, it was just my ignorance and lack of perspective that I look back. The one thing that when we talk about time, could it be quicker, is back then I wasted a lot of time. And in that was sort of all around hope. So if I engage with this potential partner in this way, the potential upside, and I didn't have the skill set yet to validate what a real opportunity was or was not. And I've gotten really skilled in doing that in a rapid fashion now. And
Mm.
I just wasted so much time. But I wouldn't take anything back. Each of them, and I have made some major mistakes. Like, personally, there could be no one else considered it for it to be attributed to except for me. But in each of them, and this is one of the more challenging things internal to the team to sort of drive into the culture of the organization, is like, make mistakes,
Yeah.
but fall forward. Like, if we're gonna fall forward.
Sure.
And so we are constantly advancing, and that is, what's the lesson? What do we need to never do again that we just did that caused this? And that is not with reprisal and disdain or any of that. It's objectively, let's look at this thing and how do we advance it? How do we improve? How do we elevate? And so, I could it be done faster? No doubt. If I had money back then, without
Fair,
a doubt.
fair.
But I would say, and I've often said this, especially kind of at that 10-year mark, um, if I wouldn't have struggled then, like if there wasn't that survival mentality, and I mean, we were at a period in true survival mentality, there would have been so many lessons learned and experiences that I never would have had.
Mm,
And it would have shaped my current leadership philosophy and the organization in a drastically different way.
interesting.
And I
Yeah.
know for me as a leader and for what I know and how I operate, it likely, I mean, you never know, right? It's all hypotheticals, but um, I probably wouldn't be as happy as
Yeah.
who I am as a leader and with the organization if we hadn't, especially for some of the long tenured employees that we have that sort of that we were hooking and jabbing uh, and that fighting hole together. Man, like from service, right? That shared experience, that bad place to be, great place to be from mentality, man, it solidifies some of us, and like that is unbreakable. And so for that, I'm truly grateful to have the hardships to be able to blossom into some prosperity right now.
So I'm gonna ask you this quick question, and then it's gonna lead to the follow on. But
Okay.
like from the beginning, right? Once you stepped in, what percentage of your team would you say is still with you today?
Um, Very small, right? I mean, so then we were a much smaller company in terms of
Okay.
total headcount. But what I'll give you as some anecdotes is we just celebrated, and I just wrote the card for it. I mean, um, an employee early on just celebrated 24th anniversary. Next year will be our 25th anniversary as an employee. We've got another that's right at 20, was there a year before me. And so they're sort of, hey, like we have gone through this together. We as a government contractor, right? We're talking, it's not the only scenario, but generally 5-year contracts.
Mm,
And so typically it's hard to hold on to them. There's constant competition. I mean, we have many right now that we are approaching the 15th year with. And so there is what we say internally, right, is there is no better evidence of excellence in delivery than when they come back to you again. And
sure.
sometimes it's more challenging. And so, yes, we've got a lot of members that are contract facing. It's just more difficult to hold on to them. There's always opportunity. There are competitive price considerations sort of in the GovCon space. But man, we've got employees that have been here for almost a quarter of a century. We've got, since I have, and man, knock on wood, we don't have this conversation later, but since I have um, sort of been at the helm, we have a 100% win rate of any recompete that we go after. So
That's
what does that tell us? When we
incredible.
get our foot in the door, we will deliver consistently, and we're not going anywhere.
That's
And,
incredible.
right. And that is truly incredible out of any performance evaluation or anything else we could ever get as an organization for quality service, et cetera. The fact that our clients come back to us because of the trust we've created and sustained, it says and means everything. So the percentage is not high, right? To
Oh
go
yeah.
back to your original question, but part of that is it's the nature of the beast.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. And the follow up to that, because it was low, you had to do a ton of hiring. You had to do a ton
Over
of
time, sure.
selecting talent. So looking back kind of at your best hires, do you think it was mindset, skill, or something else that made them successful with you?
Easy answer. Fit.
How do
Right.
you
And
define
it,
it?
and it took
Yeah,
us time. It took us time to understand that. But it's where we have really gotten it right in the last 4 years. We have not gotten it perfect by any means. And there's sort of this in the GovCon space, maybe especially, there's a bit of a difference, right? So you kind of have contract client facing work, and then you've got like headquarters support. And the way that we look at it is, I mean, our headquarters element is 100% in support of our contract facing teams, right? But for the contract facing teams, a lot of times we are having to almost, right, put, a square into a round hole kind of thing where the government explicitly defines, hey, this is what we need. And when you're also being evaluated against price, it's not just, hey, we can deliver you somebody that has 3 times the experience and all these certs. Well, there's a cost that comes with that, right? So you're balancing the qualifications with the price and potentially team dynamics, right? So it's really complicated from a competitive positioning standpoint in that way. From a headquarters element, it's a bit different. It all still impacts price, right? So I mean, all of your overhead and G&A resources impact how competitive you can be at that contract facing level. But where we have really focused, and it's fit is the singular answer across the board. But from a headquarters element, it is everything. And again, you still can't always get it right in an interview. You can't always really drill down with absolute certainty. But we've got a couple things that we do that are maybe a bit different that helps us increase the probability of being right and getting it right. Um, uh, we're much more effective in that way. But in execution, man, it's sort of that alignment to culture, organizational values. For us, it's sort of, do you get the operational excellence piece? I mean, this is how we got to show up. You know, everybody has bad days.
Okay.
How do you show up on your worst day? Like, do you communicate with people that it's a bad day? Do you still deliver, do the thing, right? And so that for us, of being able to talk through with candidates is one aspect. We have put a lot of time, effort, and focus in our onboarding process to really drill down out of the gate. First impression is this is who we are. These are the expectations, and this is how we're going to support you sort of in this effort. And then again, like we talked about, communicate early, communicate often. How consistently are we carrying on that messaging? Are we modeling it ourselves as leaders? Right. And again, if we've done it right, again, you're not going to get it right, but if we've done it right, we've created the space to have the conversations when we don't get it right. This fit isn't right. We have had multiple people like in headquarters that I really just don't know if I want to do this thing anymore. I don't want to leave. I don't know if I want to do this thing. And, timing is kind of everything there. But what we're also thinking about starting this and maybe we can make an investment. And we've moved people to do a fundamentally different, have a different role and have different responsibilities in the organization. Why? Because the fit's right. And if the fit's right, most of the other things are learned activities. And I'd rather invest time and energy in the learned activity piece because what is so hard to recreate is that fit. Man, if you've got buy-in from a person that aligns with an organization, man, it's really, really challenging. And so when you got it, you want to hold on to it with everything.
Um, Again, a lot to unpack, but you absolutely nailing it. I often say, hiring the talent piece is just part of the equation. The
Sure.
other is what you just focused on, onboarding and setting expectations and providing regular communication. I mean, that's part of leadership, right? And
Sure.
people can't expect just a great hire to then all of a sudden just figure it out immediately on day one and understand what they have to do. So it sounds like to me, you're defining fit in a number of ways, not just culturally, value wise, but it's, are you good with your expectations? Can you perform well to your expectations? Are you good with your colleagues? Are you a good human being? Um, do you live by the golden rule? So like it's all of that. So you said that you had a process. What is your process of trying to make this more data driven
Sure.
decision making?
So I mean, some of that's the secret sauce, right?
Fair, fair.
But I think what's appropriate here, sort of some wave top things is, it's easy for me or us to say all the things that I just said, right? And if I can look back, so for the early stage entrepreneurs that are getting into this or whatever, as I look back and hey, where could we have done this faster, sooner, maybe um, more impactfully? Is how did I wait too long to bring talent acquisition in house? Way too long. Um, Misstep. Again, didn't always have the resources to be able to do it, but even when we did, a little too late to the game. But so we're doing it now. So the big piece of that, right, is how do we educate our talent acquisition professionals? How well versed are they in talking the talk about ISI?
Mm.
Like, can they make a candidate feel like this is the place that they want to be? And assessing, is this the place that that candidate should be, right? Because they're that first line of defense of screening out the misalignment for fit, capabilities, qualifications. And so that's the piece of it, right? We're investing time, energy, resources, and a lot of coaching and mentoring on our talent acquisition professionals to help us get it right before it sort of elevates to the next gate. Um, and so depending on the level of the hire, right, is really the number of touch points that we may have with any given candidate. And even not just the level, like the criticality of the client, like if it's client facing. But then we're going to screen for technical capability, competency, breadth of that. I mean, what are they desirous of as an individual? Like, are they just happy sort of in the role responsibility? They want to be a SME within this area or no?
Yeah.
I want real leadership responsibility. I want to elevate. I want to be able to go like me. I want to impact an organization organizationally. Man, I want to know that every time, right? So that there's that aspect of it. And then from a data side, um, you've seen it because we've sort of rolled it out to the CEO circle piece. I mean, so we use the predictive index internally for a whole bunch of different use cases. But one of the things that we do with the predictive index is we sort of can build a job profile or conceptually around the behaviors for the job. And it's multiple data points perspectives, like the supervisor, a team member, and maybe like a corporate resource, or if we can get the client to give some input, we get that. And so it builds this profile that we then overlay when a candidate is reaching a particular stage, we have them do the assessment. And it's going to give them their behavioral profile. When you overlay the positional profile to it, you can quickly assess potential gaps. Doesn't mean there are gaps, but potential gaps. And so in that final interview process validation, we got to understand, is there something wrong with the mechanics of the assessment? Does the person have their own resources to help them bridge the gap? Or are we going to have to commit resources? Coaching, mentorship, systems, education, training, like whatever it is. It doesn't give us a yes, no answer, but it allows us to understand what the next 30, 60, 90, 6 months, 1 year might look like. And in doing that, right, that's where we're getting the fit right more and more and more. And that becomes way more critical, sort of the more senior the position is in
Mm.
leadership, because it's not just them, right? It's a force multiplier. How are the people beneath them, and then the people beneath them?
Yeah.
How is this going to trickle out? So getting it right at the top matters.
Yeah. Behavioral assessments are huge if you know how to use them and when to use them in your hiring. You mentioned predictive index, but I mean, culture
Oh yeah,
index is they're one family over there, but there's Omnia, there's the Hogan, there's the DISC,
sure.
Strength Finders. There's a whole bunch that can aid you in figuring that part out, or at least I like how you put it, finding just identify potential gaps, right?
Yep.
So I'm curious here, when you differentiate between like a high performing candidate upon hire and somebody who just interviewed well, how long is that process for you?
It depends.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, it depends. I wish that there was kind of a golden rule there for that answer.
Yeah.
And you could know whether at 30, 60, 90 days, hey, you got it right or you got it wrong. You don't. And I think the real answer to the question is know your people.
Yeah.
Like, or whether it's me or whether, if it's most appropriate given the team, the contract, whatever. Um, Whoever is the leader that takes ownership over that person or that team, how well do they know their people? Do
Yeah.
they understand who might be a flight risk? Do they understand when there is a knowledge or capability gap? Um, can they assess whether there's a fit gap? And so you cannot know those things unless you are actively engaged. And so what's really hard is, let's say that you've got a team that is just firing on all cylinders to the client. It's really easy to be complacent and be like, listen, I need less touch points with that team. It's set it and forget it. But what happens in someone's life that dramatically alters the way that they're showing up every day, right? And again, when you're talking organizational impacts, that is our reputation. The more and more concentrated you are with your client base, one instance over here can send shockwaves to all of the other programs within
Mm.
the client or the agency, right? And so for us, I mean, I think the simple answer is it totally depends on the amount of time. But the one thing that is required is knowing and being engaged with your people. Like, if you are not doing that, you will not know. That's why you're going to have the 10% that sort of skate through, do the minimum, stay under the radar. We are not an organization. Um, Listen, I violently object to the status quo.
Yeah.
If we are not continuously improving ourselves, our teams, our relationship and delivery to the client, man, like we're getting it wrong. Even if we're excelling, we're still getting it wrong. And so for us, it means kind of you got to get in and get your hands dirty. And again, part of that is, man, you got to have the financial resources to build depth of teams so that you can have people that are that engaged with sort of the breadth of the teams that you have.
Yeah, I like what you said. It's like in the army, we always say Met TC, right? It's Met TC dependent. I don't know if you guys have like Marine Corps, but but yeah, it's dependent on just knowing your surroundings, knowing that person and their motivations. You know, you've no doubt heard of Jim Collins's book Good to Great.
Yes.
And one of the points there I thought was very interesting is that like in a great company, you don't need to motivate people. Like they are already there. You don't have to like focus on that because people are already engaged and because of the mission and the
Hmm.
values. How do you feel about that for you? Do you spend time kind of purposely being intentional about the engagement piece, which is like, all of us here, but I'm curious for ISI at this point.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, I think most recently and potentially most impactfully, I mean, look at what the pandemic did, right? I mean, we went from being an all in-person headquarters team where my entire all my leaders, all my support elements were here, co-located, we're in the office every day. Now I'm one of three that are local here.
Hmm.
Uh, we are 100% remote.
Get out of here.
Outside of
Really?
teams that are sort of contractually required to be on site. Um, and so what that created, right, sort of the unintended consequence of that is all the special sauce that I felt, right, whether everybody felt it, everybody would need to chime in, but man, we were really good at the engagement, right? The water cooler stuff, the connection, all of that, and sort of scattering, being so geographically dispersed, not being in the office. Yes, we have to be very purposeful about engagement initiatives, what we do, why we do it, soliciting feedback, what's landing, what's not. So yes, and I would say, even from a good to great standpoint, if you are not focused on the cultural elements that makes your organization special, you're going to go from great back down to good, down to not so good pretty quickly, right? And so even when you've got this thriving culture, um, man, you can slip. And I think for a government contractor that may be not niche or spread, the mission drivers, it gets diluted, right? Because the VA's mission is drastically different
Yeah.
from our mission with DoD and the Pentagon, right? And so it's different. So it can't be, we don't have one unified client facing mission. It's all different. And so that's why, like in the last couple of years, when we have looked at our vision and our mission, they are both purposely curated to be external, sort of client facing, as well as internal people facing. It, and we just kept it simple. And so if we focus on that, I think the engagement, and we have seen a bunch of uptick in our engagement. Man, for years, Freddie, like I would always ask the question, like, why don't we have as much participation? Why can't we get the engagement? And part of it was, I don't think we really knew what was needed, right? We weren't asking the right questions. And so you got to ask the right questions to get the feedback, then to adjust. And so I do believe that. Um, but I can tell you, I mean, as a nearly 35-year-old business that, let's say, we've achieved some degree of success, man, this is one aspect that is still hard. Like the idea of good to great,
Yeah, it's
it is not an easy thing.
not at all.
But
Right.
I would have to say, to go back and like, I think it takes constant work. It's kind of like this high performing team thing.
Yeah.
You can be one, but if you are not consistently knocking at it, chipping away, working to advance it, um, it's going to falter pretty quickly.
Do you so those assessments, it looks like you put a lot of emphasis on those just to check in. Do you use like Q12? What do you use for those?
Sure. we try to the degree possible to curate them ourselves.
Cool.
Now we've got some tools to when like we're trying to get certain recognition, like best places to work or those things, right? So there are third parties that will come in and objectively and independently survey the organization so that there isn't you're not leading the dog,
Yeah.
so to speak. And so then we'll typically pay extra for the results from those because they are granular, they are absolutely data driven. And so for this year, as an example, we were defined to be nationally as a best place to work and in Virginia, a best place to work. But
Congratulations.
thank you. I mean, it's great recognition for the team and their initiatives and execution, but we got data back for where we can improve. And so
Yeah.
like we got the recognition, but then it was still very clear in the data, like, hey, we do have some gaps that, require some attention. And so it goes back to that mentality of violently objecting to the status quo. Oh, man, we're so good, let's ride this thing out. No, constantly advance, constantly improve. And the better you get, the more incremental the improvements are, and the harder it is to sort of make those tweaks. To some degree, I think that's kind of where we are. But the organization is worth it, the people are worth it, and the more that we can refine and improve and drive value to our people and our clients, then I believe everything does sort of take care of itself.
Yeah, right before this we started recording, you were talking about that sign that
Oh
we
yeah.
see when we land in like a combat zone, right? What how do you make sure that everybody like resonates with that, Chris? You know? That sign. What does it say? First of all, tell us that.
Complacency kills.
Yes.
And you know,
But how do you like
I
now?
wish I knew if those signs were still in existence, like leaving a fob.
Yeah.
They should be if they're not. But it is something that has always resonated with me. And you don't know, you know what it means, um, but you don't know the impact, like until the worst happens. Especially when it's sort of complacency driven.
Yeah.
Um, Talk about a cage rat. And so, in an organization, that is not warfighter facing like ISI, I think it takes time. I think more importantly, it takes modeling. Part of my story and my experience almost made it a bit easier because we were so resource constrained, like in survival mode, like that there was no rank and file. Everyone was doing everything that needed to be done. And so that sort of organically became a part of our culture. And I mean, we were just having a leadership call yesterday, and one of sort of the ice melters going into it was sort of a gratitude session around like what is each individual grateful for among the team, and the resounding multiple people. It was that this is a team where the individuals are so willing to jump out and help another, um, and, and that I think is just a component of this, the mentality of how we came to be what we are, which is everybody does everything if needed. So if
Hmm.
somebody needs help, I'll figure out what I got to do on my time. I got to jump in and help somebody else. And when that happens across the board, man, again
Oh,
force
imagine.
multiplier.
Imagine.
But the other thing is just modeling it. If I am not doing that at the top, personal as well as professional development, constantly trying to where can I be better as a leader in feedback sessions with my other leaders. Are we getting it right? And it's just asking that, are we getting it right? And you can subjectively and objectively define what right looks like and is. But I think that's got to be a collaborative approach.
Like what mistakes do you see business owners or veteran business owners make when hiring?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an answer on the veteran business owner side. I would just say generally, um, there's a couple, right? You've got the bottom line is one hell of a driver, right? So I think, and in fact, I'll only talk kind of GovCon space, is depending on the level of maturity of the organization and those supporting it, especially in sort of capture and business development, is like how well do you know your competition?
Hmm.
So how price competitive may an opportunity be? Are there pain points within the end user, the client, that you understand how price sensitive they are, right? And so with that is what is your pricing approach, which impacts directly and is impacted by talent acquisition. So out of the gate, Are you doing your due diligence to understand the requirements of the position? So role, responsibilities. Um, is it accurate, or are you pulling it off of offline, right? So if you're an incumbent, you know exactly what these people. And if you don't, you're not talking to your people, and shame on you, and you're going to miss the opportunity anyway. But if you're not an incumbent, let's say you're bidding on something that you don't know anyone that's actually doing the work today, you're going to have to make some generalizations. And so I think where we have certainly gotten it wrong in the past is kind of missing that initial salary range, like your go-to-market is going to be. And now, listen, you need to be putting that salary range and the expectation in the JD and the rec that's going to go to
Oh,
market.
absolutely.
You
That
know,
that's just so much more efficient.
yeah.
Now
So I think a lot of people are not still doing that, right? They don't want to leave anything on the table, and so
yeah.
they're trying to
Yeah.
hold their cards close.
Well, let me ask you, let me from the stance of your core team, right?
Sure.
Because not everyone's going to be in business in government contracting. So what mistakes do people make when hiring just their organic team, not your contractors or client facing folks?
So I would say the first part there is still true, right? And so
Not knowing.
one, do you have the right organizational structure? And that's not an explicit talent acquisition thing, but if you don't have the right structure, it almost doesn't matter who you bring in
Hmm.
unless they are so good that they start to point the focus back at, hey, I don't think we got the organizational structure right. And so I think that's key. Did you go through the effort to truly define the roles and responsibilities? Like, what is this person going to be doing? And so if you're interviewing somebody, you can get super tactical and experiential of saying, hey, tell me an instance when, what did you do? What were the impacts, right? And so without knowing what they're going to do, and listen, we have been there. When you're building a plane as you're flying it, you don't know. I just need help, and sometimes it's super short fused, and so you just got to move. But I think any of that effort to hone in on, however exacting you can be, the role, the responsibilities, the impact. I think getting, especially if it's an internal sort of headquarters resource, man, have multiple people sitting on the interview, give their feedback. I mean, somebody's looking at body language. How are the answers clear, concise? Can they communicate? Have a SME that can ask a hard question, like to kind of raise a bullshit flag, right? So I think that's how you can kind of get through the really good interviewers, is just having sort of the devil's advocate that can be there to say, hey, I'm not so sure that you actually know what you're talking about here. Let me ask you a real question.
Mm.
We have moved away from, we've had times, Freddie, where we sort of had a, either adjectival or numerics like grading system for people. And what I've found is that it's a lot of wasted effort for us, right? It was wasted effort in doing that. Um, and each time that we did that, it didn't work out,
Hmm.
right? And so I think using a more holistic, so multiple team members be able to provide input, and subjective, candidly, subjective, because we have so gotten the fit component right, and it's really challenging to objectively numerically score that thing. It's
Interesting.
is this somebody that you want to be working aside,
That
by day in and day out?
that's super interesting. So, okay, so when you say multiple people interviewing, you're not talking about just multiple stages of interview. You're talking
Oh,
about
like in an interview, yeah. So
panel.
let's say it's our director of finance. We'll have director of contracts and likely somebody from HR. So they are going to be interfacing with each other, sort of peer to peer, every single day.
Hmm.
And to some degree, they know the role and responsibility in an intimate way. Systems integration, what's your level of experience in this? How do you run this report? What do you like, don't like? And so their feedback. Now, you got to have to screen for any potential subjective bias that may be in there as well.
Hmm.
But once you get into doing it this way, and if you've gotten the culture right and you've set the expectations the right way, I think you can start to discount that to a certain degree. Like, if you have the right, you've got to make sure it's the right people in the room,
Yeah.
holding
Doing
that
the first
interview.
interview.
But
Yeah.
but I want that feedback. Like, how many times have you had to work with somebody? You're like, oh, they're so good, but I can't believe I got to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Like, that is painful, toxic. And when you're trying to build like the culture that we are, um, the thing that I think it immediately impacts is like psychological safety, because people don't show up the same way, really willing to engage if they don't want somebody to know something about them.
Yeah, that's a fascinating approach, and I think that answers my question, my other question was a non-traditional hiring strategy that you used well, but that, going away from the objective
Sure.
rating systems, that's cool. And then you're just saying, hey, let the people who know, or you're going to be in the trenches with that person, let them
Yep.
give you subjective
Sure.
feedback. I mean, that
Sure.
works.
Well, let me be clear. I mean, we're especially for certain levels of positions. I mean, we still have evaluation criteria that we're going into to evaluate against.
Sure.
Um, but when you're talking about an individual, unless you have explicitly defined objective criteria, which how do you do that? The objective criteria is number of years of experience and education, right? That's yes, no, pass, fail. And so it fundamentally, if you're getting feedback from people, I feel like, and I've been like on the government side in enough like source selection evaluations, it's still inherently subjective. And what you got to try to do is to be able to define and recognize what is subjective or not. And like even in questions, there are just some subjective questions that, hey, your input on how they answered is just going to be generally objective. But I mean, so we're really specific to the role of sort of the criteria we're evaluating against, just to be clear. But I think the answer to your question that's outside of that, um, and I don't know whether it's unique to GovCon, but I look at a partnering approach, and you and I have actually had this conversation. At the end of the day, we've got a mission to fulfill for our clients, which is the embodiment and realization of their mission success. And so I think that any organization, contractors supporting the government, being good stewards of the tax dollar and sort of partners in that, you got to deliver the best way possible. And an atypical talent acquisition strategy that we regularly use is through our partners. So that could be third-party talent acquisition firms, recruiting firms. It could be really good partners in a prime subcontractor relationship. Can you pool resources for a particular requirement? Not knowing what's going to happen. Because at the end of the day, it's about mission fulfillment. And so if it's not a position of ours, and we can help somebody fill it really rapidly, we try to do it. And,
Sure.
and vice versa for the right partner firms, it's hey, I've got this body. The network effect. I mean, one of our most recent hires was a really close partner firm. CEO reached out and said, "Hey, I got this resource. The client just did a reduction in force on this contract. It was like by 50+%. Got this all star."
Mm.
And we had just been talking about the potential in 2025 making a hire to fill this role. So we just expedited it. And so like that, the compounding effect of the networks, the relationships that if you can be free flowing and you got to give to take, right? Is we have gotten a lot of really, really good talent through our partnerships. The other thing, especially in the context of this, is fully leveraging hiring heroes at SkillBridge. We have last year had a tremendous leader hire coming out of Hire Heroes. And so fully leveraging that program for all that it can be, um, man, to have a fellow, even if it doesn't work out, like we as veteran owners and entrepreneurs, right, to offer a safe landing spot for a transitioning veteran to understand what it is that they're looking for, maybe what they are not looking for. Um, and I think if you approach that program or programs like it with that mentality, like it's the service to the transitioning veteran, man, tremendous capability, and we are going to continue to really, really leverage hiring our heroes just because we've had really good success with it.
Interesting. Was that hire for the organic team or for a
For
contractor?
a contract. So what it allowed us to do though, candidly, and so it was part of a more strategic plan that like we have to engage with the client. Here's what we're thinking. And so it allowed me to extract a senior leader from this contract, from this program, and input to give sort of our headquarters more depth of leadership within a particular business unit. And the replacement came from hiring our heroes. So he's there at no cost, right? I mean, working alongside our teams, delivering every day for 90 days. So we were able to evaluate, the client's able to evaluate, and at the end, as we're approaching the end, like, is this a fit? And in that instance, the answer was yes. And so then it allowed us to execute sort of the rest of the dominoes of being able to add depth to the rest of the organization. So, but I would say for anybody that hasn't gone down the path of SkillBridge or hiring our heroes,
You're
just
missing
do
out.
it with thought. Like be
Yeah,
purposeful about it.
sure.
It is not a quick fix. Again, we're dealing with people's lives, and I think if you go into it with sort of that care of trying to help the veteran transitioning, first and foremost the end, it will be a success all around.
Which will also add to you, the bottom line for
Oh,
you. Yeah.
significantly, yes.
Yeah. Chris, this has been an awesome conversation. Learned a tremendous amount. I appreciate everything. I mean, again, very insightful conversation. And to our listeners, if you are looking to connect with Chris, please do so. LinkedIn. Make sure you
Please,
get his his last name right, even though it's Lefebvre. Get that right, and then also look up ISI. I mean,
please.
their website is nicely done, and they are really branding their values heavily. So really good to see.
Awesome. Appreciate the plug, man.
Thank you. Thank you. And to our listeners, again, go build your A team. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.